You're now listening to the Adiel Gorel Show. Each episode I'll bring you the latest news from my discussions with top health and wellness experts so that you can bring yourself into better health. Today on the Adiel Gorel Show.
Well, part of it is don't get on those websites. I realize it still impacts us, but a lot of people will get on websites and, the news websites and get stuck and look at this and look at this and look at this. There's research out of Harvard that shows that watching the news for 3 minutes in the morning, increases your chance of having a bad day, what I would call a red zone day, by 27%. Even having it on in the background.
So it's just like in a car, the RPM that you can see, it starts in green, it goes to yellow. We'll talk about yellow in a second. If it even exists, and then it goes to red.
Yep.
So I'm assuming if 7 to 10 is red, I'm assuming 0 to 3 or 4 is green.
Green, yes. I even wear my green for green zone. That's the green, and then the yellow is kind of in between. Again, we don't think rationally in the red zone. And you can't get on the news lately without hearing about red zone behavior, right? The slap that was heard around the world. Will Smith, the great example of red zone. These people who are yelling at flight attendants, great example of red zone. There was that ice cream place in Massachusetts that had to close during the pandemic because people were being so mean to these kids who were serving ice cream. That is red zone behavior. So a lot of people are really functioning in this place of red zone. Red zone, high levels of distress causes us to think more negatively, more distress, more negative thoughts, and people are just stuck in this vicious cycle.
How do you break the vicious cycle?
Yeah. We break the vicious cycle first by being aware of it. When I'm working with my clients, the first thing I say is start to realize where you are on a regular basis. I'm sure we've all had an experience where we didn't realize we were in that red zone until, we kind of lost it maybe on a loved one or something like that. So start to be aware of what are your signs that you're in the red zone or creeping into the red zone. And I call these signs red flags. So there are 3 of them. There are 4 of them. One is emotions you don't want. When you notice yourself feeling very anxious or sad or angry, and that could be indicated that you're in the red zone. Second is physical sensations, right? Think about where does stress go in your body. For some people, it's GI discomfort. For some people, it's headaches. I remember when I was working on my dissertation, I walked by the mirror and this is how I looked. My ears and my shoulders had become one. Because for me, my red zone goes here. And so if I start rubbing my neck, kind of unconsciously, that's a cue to me, where am I on this scale? And then the other one is behaviors, engaging in behaviors we don't want. It could be being irritable with a loved one, procrastination, all of those things. And then the fourth one, which isn't always easy to identify, are when we're having really negative thoughts. When we're having thoughts about life is horrible, it's never going to get better, I'm horrible. Those are red zone thoughts. And again, we think differently in the red zone versus the green zone. So the first step to really helping yourself is to be aware of where you are. And depending on where you are, you want to take steps to decrease that number. And I say depending on where you are because I used to work with clients. And for example, I talk about the importance of gratitude. And I know you're familiar with the research of gratitude, which is overwhelmingly, brain scans show that when people experience gratitude, the stress activities in their brains, it decreases. It just really helps us feel happier and calmer. But when we're in the red zone, I had a particular client. She was, I was doing some executive coaching with her, and she had a colleague who just put her right in the red zone. And she said she was having a conversation with him. And a lot of my clients will say, I'm in their head. So she's like, I could hear you telling me to be grateful, and I didn't want to be. And I thought, that's a great example of red zone, because let me just take a step back and talk about the brain for a minute, basic elementary. So when we're in the green zone, when we're at low levels of distress, we're using more of that frontal lobe, right? The structure in our brain that differentiates us from other animals. It allows us to engage in executive functioning, problem solving, perspective taking. When we're in the green zone, we can see the good and the not so good. When we're in the green zone, we give people the benefit of the doubt. When our partner does something, it's kind of annoying. They're just having a tough day. That's just who they are, right? We have more resilience in the green zone. Yeah, times are tough, but I can handle this, right? So that's how we think in the green zone. As we go up on this distress scale, though, our focus narrows, such that when we get into the red zone, a 7, an 8, a 9, or a 10, we're focusing almost exclusively on the negatives, what's wrong. And biologically what's happening, again, this is a simplified version, is our limbic system, that fight or flight mechanism, hijacks our rational thinking. And this made sense evolutionarily, right? If our cave ancestors heard a rustling in the bush and thought it's probably nothing, they may not live another day. Instead, they went into the red zone, right? They focused on the problem, fight or flight, get rid of the animal, get away from the animal. Once the animal was gone, out of the red zone they went. What's happening with a lot of people right now is their sources of stress that are putting them in the red zone aren't a short-term episode like an animal present or not, right? Pandemic, what's going on in the world, health issues, financial stuff that's going on. And so a lot of people are living in this red zone, and they're living in a fight or flight place without even realizing it. So their subconscious.
It makes.
Say it again.
Go ahead.
No, it's fine.
Please.
Yeah. So their subconscious. It's almost like our subconscious when we're in the red zone. It's almost like it thinks we're drowning, right? So if you're drowning and someone said, "Just calm down, be grateful." Right? Who would do that? We're still going to scream and yell and try to save ourselves. And that's the way a lot of brains in the red zone are functioning. And so things like gratitude, absolutely wonderful, don't necessarily work until you're in more of that yellow or even the green zone. Then we can experience that.
Well, it makes perfect sense. When you talked about the signs of telling that you're in the red zone, yeah, you can see the physical, you can see this. But you said the thoughts are more subtle, because when we are in a space of these kind of thought, we justify the thoughts. No, I'm right. Everyone is mean. Everyone's a serial killer. Everyone is horrible. And the thoughts self-perpetuate. Yeah. So that's going to be the hardest one to look at. So I have a question for you. Obviously, physical activity, everywhere you look, physical activity is good for us, assuming you can do it. Yeah. Hiking, walking, lifting, high intensity, yoga, Pilates. I would assume physical activity would be a tremendous way to inject an intervention into being in the red zone, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. I'll call exercise non-pharmacological Xanax. I taught group fitness for 20 years. I am a huge proponent of exercise. Yeah, so I actually have, I created something called the HELM principle, HELM, to help people remember what you can do when you're in the red zone. And the E is absolutely exercise. And when we talk about exercise, a lot of times people, I don't have time to go to the gym. I'm literally talking about a couple of minutes of push-ups, sit-ups, squats, jumping on the bed, walking up a flight of stairs. I had a client, I'm in my office where I see clients in person. I had a client who was really stressed out. She was in the red zone, and she's like, when I'm at school, what am I supposed to do? Do push-ups? That's not going to happen. So I had her stand up, and we ran in place for 45 seconds as fast as we could. 45 seconds. It got her out of the red zone. So yeah.
That's very intense.
Yeah. So exercise is great. The H, I'll just go over the HELM principle so that everyone.
I was going to ask.
Yeah. Okay. The H stands for halt. And by halt, I mean halt all movement in this region of your body, right? When you are in the red zone, don't let anything out of your mouth, because that's when we say things we later regret. And don't put anything in your mouth, because that's when we tend to consume things we later regret, right? So that's the H. The E is exercise, as we talked about. L, laughter, right? Laughter, like exercise, releases biochemicals in our brain so that we see things in a more positive light. And I'll give an example. The other day, my teenager was being teenagery, and I felt myself creeping into the red zone. And in our household, you can imagine what it's like to have a mom as a shrink, but we have conversations about red zone. I highly recommend that everyone have conversations in their place of work and in their place of home and with their friends about the red zone. We can have a conversation about that. But anyway, so I said, I feel like I'm creeping into the red zone. I didn't want to say something that was going to cause more problems. So I went into my office. I hopped on YouTube. I watched a couple of SNL skits, which I find very funny. I got out of the red zone, and then I could be a better mom to my daughter. So that's L, and then M stands for music. right? I'm sure you've heard a song that you haven't heard in years, even decades, and it brings you right back to that time. So music can have a really powerful impact on our emotions. And I actually recommend my coaching clients have a get out of the red zone playlist, right? Of songs that bring them back to a happier time. They like the lyrics, they like the beat, because when we're in the red zone, it's hard to think what song would be helpful right now. If you just hit play, you're good to go. If you dance and listen to the music, you have 2 of those, right? If you dance like me, you'll probably be laughing. So then you have 3 of them. So those are things that will get us out of the red zone. Is that going to change your life forever? Not necessarily. But once you're out of the red zone, then you can start to think more rationally. Then you can start to use some of the other skills to be more in the green zone and also solve the problem more effectively.
Yes, so I was going to ask about the laughter, because obviously if we are in the red zone, we are not going to laugh too much, but I understood what you did. You went away and watched something funny. It gave you, the opportunity to laugh. Maybe you didn't laugh, the first episode because you're still so mad, but maybe the second one. Yeah. So, here's another, I'm going to have an episode on this show about rebounders. A rebounder is very small. Maybe this is the diameter.
I taught a class, we called urban rebounding, and I taught a kickboxing on it, and I taught a regular class on it. I love those.
So that takes every excuse out. If you park one of those devices in front of your television, hey, you can still do your Netflix, but you're rebounding a little bit. No excuse now. Yeah?
Do you know what? I have it in my home office, and when my girls were younger, I have 2 daughters, when they were younger, it usually was surrounded with math. When they were stressed out about math, they would come and they'd start jumping on it. And what they would do, obviously, would be to reduce their distress. And it also, a red zone brain can't solve problems. It can't function the way that we want it to. So it would get them out of the red zone. So not only do they feel better, but then they could think more clearly and be able to go back and deal with their math problem.
Okay, so you have teenagers. I have a teenager and one that's 20. How old are your girls?
We have a 16, 18-year-old daughters.
So I have a 20-year-old and an 18-year-old. So we overlap there.
We'll be there.
Boy, my boy's 18, my girl is 20. Now, they say, you talked about using our frontal cortex, what makes us higher, so to speak, than, apparently, and of course, it so much better than me, the frontal cortex doesn't finish growing development until 25.
25. And sometimes even a little later in males, but yes.
Oh, males, I'm sure 75 at least, because, I'm a male, so I know. But of course, ego and all of that. So my car is bigger than your, of course, we know all of that. But all our 4 children are very far away from 25. Mm-hmm. So you have a whole chunk of the population, and I did mention Gen Z before, those pre-med students, they were like 23. So how does it reconcile that maybe they're not in the red zone, but their frontal cortex is not really fully functioning yet?
Yeah, we can look at an example of this with the rates of stress and anxiety that our teens are experiencing, and they're predisposed to it because there's more activity going on in their limbic system than their frontal lobe anyway. Before the pandemic, the average teen, their level of anxiety was equivalent to a teen from the 1950s who is institutionalized. It's only getting worse since the pandemic. I actually started a company during the pandemic. It's called Elevive, Elevate Your Mindset, Thrive in Life. And it's mind skills training for adolescents and their parents to be getting these. And again, these are skills. It's like learning how to, play the piano or sport. When you learn the skills and you practice the skills, you can't help but get better. But for some reason, we aren't teaching our kids. And parents don't have these skills either. So I'm trying to teach the parents too, these skills on how to get out of the red zone, right? Emotional regulation, grit, perseverance, all of this, so that they have the tools to be able to deal with, wow, I got a not great grade on my test. What am I going to do?
Well, I would like to also pose the following question. I'm guessing that when you were a little girl, you played outside a lot.
Okay.
You maybe ran with your friend. I'm assuming. I could be wrong. Maybe you never played that, but I'm assuming you played outside more than a typical kid does now. I know that I did. We ran outside. What did we see? We saw the sky. We saw the trees. We saw all kinds of animals, dogs. We ran. We laughed. Nowadays, there's a new player in the game. This guy,
Yep.
or this girl, if you want to call it. And our children, yours and mine, similar ages, were essentially born into this. So now, how does this change everything?
It changes everything. We don't even know how much it's changing everything, but it's changing everything. It's changing everything from, we talked about the conditional self-worth just increases. Perfectionism has increased because what's happening, people are comparing themselves not just to the kids that they see, but who's on social media. I would say everyone looks good with a filter, right? So, they're comparing themselves to these unrealistic expectations. Yeah, we do not know scientifically the severe impact that our phones are making on our children. It is significant. It's impacting their mental health. But what we have to also remember is it's not all evil. So let's take the quarantine that we all went through. Having that phone and still being able to interact with others was very important for a lot of people. So
Zoom.
yeah, Zoom, right? Exactly. I mean, Zoom parties, right? We used to. A lot of times people want to vilify our phone. I say, let's use it for good instead of evil. And one way to determine that is, how do you feel when you've been on your phone? That's what I ask my teens all the time. My kids and other kids, how do you feel? So sometimes, I'm not a big TikTok person, but sometimes, I have clients who, when they want to do the Helm principle, the laughter, they'll hop on TikTok and they'll watch some funny videos. It's good. And they leave feeling elevated. They leave feeling happier. Great. What's happening with a lot of kids is they're on it. They feel worse they're on it, and they're on it and, for hours and hours and hours and hours, getting sucked into that. And that's, where one of the problems arises.
You and I talked about Netflix. That's the adult way to talk about those, addictive, mindless, which I love, by the way. But the younger version is loaded with the equivalent of Netflix on steroids, because there's always a distraction. Did I get elected? Did I not get elected? Did I do the plus even just the blue light?
Yep.
I had a segment on the Feldenkrais method. I'm actually a practitioner.
Ah.
Moshe Feldenkrais said in 1982 or something like this, it was only the beginning of the personal computer. They were only starting. And he said, the input to our brain is not 20%, out of each of our 5 senses. No, vision is extremely dominant. It's much more. Maybe I'm just making it up. 60%. So he said, we were made to look outside, to look far, to look near, to play outside. I'm starting to see people, he said it in 1982, 40 years ago. I'm starting to see people looking at those screens. And I'm telling you, if this gets more prevalent, which apparently it has, he said, you're going to see people in the future. They're going to look like humans. They're going to sound like humans. They're not going to be humans. They're going to be monsters. Whoa, that was a strong statement. What does monster mean? Maybe monster just means more inclined to go to the distraction, more inclined to be in the red zone. But it's interesting that this is such a powerful influence on the kids.
Well, and when you say monster, what comes to mind too is all of the, what we call it, cyberbullying, of just the meanness that happens.
Yeah.
Particularly when you can't see, when it's not face to face. People have no problem putting someone down if they aren't looking at them. However, I will say, with more people in the red zone, they're doing this by looking at their faces. So there's really a I'm not going to use the word epidemic or pandemic, but this whole red zone-ness is very prevalent. The beauty, though, is we don't have to have everything perfect in our own lives to take these steps to get out and live outside of the red zone. And that's the real key. I think a lot of times people think, if and when, this changes, I have more money or the pandemic's over or whatever, then everything's going to be okay. We all realize that once, I don't know where we are in this pandemic, but as things has started to come back to normal, that hasn't happened. People haven't suddenly said, oh, my life is great now. It's not the situation. It's not experiences. It's not even people in our lives that put us in the red zone. It's what we say to ourselves about them. And if I could share a personal example, so my husband, love of my life, we've been together well over half of my life, 8.5 years ago was diagnosed with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. So prognosis 3 to 5 years. 5.5 years ago, almost 6 years ago, he was in the hospital for 90 days, came home weighing 101 pounds. He's trached, so there's a hole in his neck. He's on a ventilator, a feeding tube, requires 24/7 care. And that the disease has progressed so much that he's completely paralyzed, nonverbal. He can move his eyes, but that's about it. To say that it's stressful, obviously, right? But we still get to choose how we deal with that. Are there times where I'm in the red zone and have snot coming out of my nose crying? Absolutely, right? But there are also a lot of times when we're laughing, when we're enjoying each other, when we can still converse. He has this eye gaze board so he can communicate with his eyes. And there's still really wonderful times that we have together. So thinking it's all external events really disempowers us. And so what I hope people hear is even when things are tough, we get to choose how we deal with them. Is it easy? Not all the time, but we can take those steps. We can make them habits within our lives to spend more time in the green zone so that we can be happier, so that we can be more fulfilled, so that we can enjoy life regardless of what it looks like at this particular point.
So I want to thank you for being vulnerable and sharing your story. And it does put a very unique perspective on your message, because you certainly are very cheerful, you're very up. And then I hear this and it makes it even more special. And I thank you for that.
Thank you.
I do want to go back at what you said, before the flight, the fight or flight, the red zone, that it has its usefulness out there in the primitive world, but we get a constant dose of it. So, the media, I don't blame them really, because that's their job. I mean, let's say that you and I own a media company and we say, listen, we need to get clicks, we need to get viewers, we need to get, well, you don't get clicks and viewers by saying, today was a beautiful sunny day and people ate at the restaurant. Oh, that's going to be so boring.
So grateful for the blue sky. Yeah, no.
Yeah. So what do you want to put there? There's a recession. There's a depression. There's a this. There's a war. There's a pandemic. So the media is almost compelled to put out that stuff, and the negative seems to get more clicks. Yeah. So now you talk about fight or flight. We are bombarded with this from the media is everywhere now. So that makes it, some people say, I'm just not going to read, the newspaper anymore. I'm not going to go online anymore. It's not realistic. But now we get this constant, and we also build a tolerance. So it's like you see a movie, somebody killed someone. After you see 10 of those movies, he killed. So now it needs to be gory. It needs to be. So the media just keeps on making it harsher and harsher. So how do we deal with that?
Yeah. Well, part of it is don't get on those websites. I realize it still impacts us, but a lot of people will get on websites and, the news websites and get stuck and look at this and look at this and look at this. There's research out of Harvard that shows that watching the news for 3 minutes in the morning, increases your chance of having a bad day, what I would call a red zone day, by 27%. Even having it on in the background. Be super conscientious of what you put in your brain. There's that saying, you are what you eat. You are what you think. And what you think is impacted by what's going on, what you're absorbing, what you're listening to. And so being really aware and thoughtful of what you put into your brain is key. So, what are you focusing on? Are you focusing on what's going wrong in this world? Yeah, there's a lot of not good stuff going on. There's also a lot of good stuff. So, where do you want to focus your attention, and being really conscientious, not in a not in a delusional, life's perfect kind of way, but in a, hey, what, I would say, ask yourself the question, what's going well right now? When do we ever ask ourselves that question, right? Or when we feel stuck, a lot of times we focus on what we can't do. I offer to my clients the question of what can I do? What can I do? When my husband was diagnosed with ALS, the doctor at the Mayo Clinic looked at me and said, take him home to prepare. That was the only advice he gave me. No, here's a support group. Here's a potential, treatment you may want to try. Take him home to prepare. So we asked that question, what can we do? And that led to years of treatments, some of which really helped him. But it also led to us focusing on enjoying our time together, on being grateful for, that our family can still be together. So asking the questions that you want. We don't need to be a victim of the news. We get to control how it goes into us and what else we put into us.
Well, Elizabeth, you're clearly a powerhouse. You bring forth very positive energy, which right by itself will notch me down from 7 to 3, right, by listening to you. So that's already great. I would like our viewers, I'd like our listeners to benefit from your work. Let's talk about how they can. So if you can start with your books.
Sure. So my most recent book is Get Out of the Red Zone, Transform Your Stress to Optimize True Success. I have a book on perfectionism, Better Than Perfect, 7 Strategies to Crush Your Inner Critic and Create a Life You Love. I have a book From Entitlement to Intention, Raising Purpose-Driven Children. And then I have a book called A Happy You, Your Ultimate Prescription for Happiness. And my goal is not only to help educate, but to offer, I always say, bite-sized, digestible action steps that we can take. And when we start to take those, even small steps, it can put us in the right direction. And if we keep moving in that direction, it's going to have a positive impact on our lives.
So here I am, I'm driving in my car listening to this podcast. I'm a busy person. Which one of those books should I start with?
I would start with Get Out of the Red Zone because that was my most recent one. And I think everyone can relate to being in the red zone, not only ourselves, but how do we deal with our loved ones? How do we deal with our colleagues? How do we deal with strangers who are in the red zone? Instead of getting sucked into their negativity, instead of, getting mad at them, how can you protect your own energy, but also best interact with them? So I would say get out of the red zone.
Okay. And you also mentioned that you work with people. I don't know if you work with people just physically one-on-one or by video. How can people benefit from those facilities?
Thank you. Yeah. So I'm a professional speaker. So a lot of times organizations will bring me in, we'll do a keynote, and then we'll start to do some consulting. So we got the concepts of the red zone. Now, how are we going to actually implement it in our daily lives? And I'll just tell a quick story if I can. So I gave a keynote to an organization, met with the executive team, did some coaching after, and the CFO said, after understanding the concept of the red zone, before every meeting, I ask people where they are from 0 to 10, including myself. She had a really important meeting with her financial analyst, right? They were going to go over projections for next year. She said he was at a 9 out of 10. She's like, I knew he'd be no good to me. So rescheduled the meeting. She got him a gift certificate to Grubhub. They met the next day and had a great meeting. What is she communicating? Not just that individual, but the entire culture. You matter. Your mental health matters. By the way, mental health is a huge issue right now. People don't know how to talk about it in a way that people can hear it and destigmatize it. That's what red zone is. So just using this language can be helpful. But in this organization, it's now very well known. Your mental well-being is absolutely a priority. Not only can we be successful, but we're going to be more successful when your mindset is right. So I do group coaching, and then I also do one-on-one coaching.
And how does that happen?
They would go to elizabethlombardo.com, and they would hit the coaching or consulting tab right there. And I'm not sure when this is going to be airing, but my new website should be out very soon. So hopefully by the time this comes out, my new website will be there.
And it's going to still be called the same, right?
It's still called elizabethlombardo.com because that's still my name.
Elizabeth, I want to thank you so much. I know how busy you are for taking the time to be on our podcast. I'm sure we'll see each other again. We'll talk to you again. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. And thanks for doing this. I love this notion of you bringing thought leaders and just helping to provide, again, that bite-sized, digestible information that we all can use. So I adore your podcast, and it's just a real honor to get to be on it.
Thank you so much, and we'll see you soon.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you for joining me today for the second part of our amazing interview. If you didn't catch part 1, don't miss out. The link is in the description below for you. And be sure to click the subscribe button for more videos.